Mr. Ravi Vora, who would be talking to us on the India International Airmail, which is a combination Frankings. It's very interesting that Mr. Vora started stamp collecting at the age of 8. He received a packet of colorful stamps from his uncle, and over the past 5 decades, his interest has evolved from philately to postal history, creating compelling stories through stamps, including studies on 19th century Indo American history through philately, Smithsonian, World War One to Versailles peace treaty through diplomatic and military mail, India, the United Nations peacekeeping forces, and Monaco 2022, Indian combination franking. Thank you so much for being here this evening, Mr. Vora. The floor is open and we're looking forward on your presentation.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm going to talk about. So this presentation is largely based on an 8-frame exhibit I've shown in a non-competitive category in Monaco 2022. And the section that we're going to share and talk about is related to the airmail covers bearing both the Indian and foreign stamps and how that happened. They both include philatelic and commercial covers and souvenir flights. So the presentation will cover about 8 different categories that I've organized this presentation. First of all will be the pioneer or special flight services. Around the world flight became very popular in the 1930s, so there are a few examples of that. Then we move on to more postal reasons where the underpaid mail from India to foreign destinations required foreign postage, including those that were returned from India on first flights. Then we go to the more commercial aspects of airmail service between India and United States, where airmail service within US was not require additional postage, but not well known. Another interesting thing is the use of what I would call special postage requirement by US Post Office for customs clearances on parcel service. Then we move on to military mail during World War II that created this combination Frankings. And last but not the least is that India is in a unique location that handles and has handled mail from neighboring countries that during the time when they were not member of UPU. So this is a cover Alan Cobham flight, Anglo-Indian survey flight in 1925. This is the cover that's a portion of flying from Calcutta to London. There is a 2 on a uncancelled stamp, but it's unclear to me why that stamp was placed, because it's possible that maybe the pilot or the who prepared the cover may have intended to put a mail or get postal canceled, but didn't get to it. When it arrived in London, it had a local address, so it did enter the British Postal Service, and it required postage that was equivalent to three penny postage due. Very few pioneer flight covers are known with combination franking between Great Britain and India. So now we move to an interesting attempt for a around the world flight. It was sponsored by a wealthy publisher of Baltimore Sun in Maryland, and he financed and arranged with the Dutch pilots and Dutch planes to arrange this flight in 1930 between London through Tokyo, and then the mail would be returned back to US by surface mail. I'm showing on the right side the equivalent of the plane that was used. And then next to it is Mr. Van Leer Black, who actually was on that flight and is alighting from that plane. Uh, he also had the pilot, his mechanic, as well as his personal secretary that took off from Croydon Airport. The cover does bear the one Anna Indian stamp, and it did have 2 cent United States stamp because once it was returned from Tokyo by surface mail to San Francisco, then it required US postage for domestic service. Uh, there are only supposedly about 26 covers produced, but even fewer are known that bear proper cancellation. This one was sent to Alameda uh, in California, and at least one report I've seen that says maybe no more than 3 or 4 such covers with a dual cancellations are known. Another flight effort was in 1927 between Great Britain and United States. However, this cover were prepared specifically by a very well-known American aerophilautic dealer, Rosseller. I think he must have teamed up with Stephen Smith in Calcutta and created this special attempt for around the world flight. The flight actually originated from London, then on to Calcutta. The British postage you see is sufficient for the surface and airmail fee, and then it bears the Indian stamps for 3 Anna that represents surface mail postage. And finally, the 2 cent and 12 cent, 2 cent stamp in the front, US stamp, and a 10 cent airmail stamp on the back that were supposed to cover the US postage once it entered the US shores. Um, the flight actually used number of different means to fly. It flew from London to Brindisi to Port Said, perhaps to by air. Then it went by rail to Cairo, back by air to Basra, and then from Basra by sea to Karachi, then by rail from Calcutta, from Karachi to Calcutta. It does arrive, and again, it was returned back through London and New York. And when it arrived in Chicago, the mailbag was open. It paid Airmail's fee for flying from Chicago to New Jersey, where the return address was posted. There's an interesting uh, early Airmail cachet labeled by Airmail, which is pretty nice. Uh, Supposedly, only 3 out of 30 covers prepared bear proper cancellation of U.S. stamps on return. Uh, we show on the right side picture the plane. I can't remember whether that was shown landed or takeoff, but I always think it's nice to see the vintage planes that flew these covers. So by early 1930s, the concept of round the world flight became very popular, and promotional flights were organized both for adventure and I guess for financial rewards. This particular cover was flown by Mr. Juan Grano, and he decided to do this flight purely philatelic from Frederickshafen to Iceland, Canada, Alaska, Japan, Philippines. Pretty ambitious flight service, and it was signed by him. Philippines even chose to prepare a special overprinted airmail stamp in commemoration of this flight. That stamp is shown on the left side, and that was issued on the day that flight took off from Manila. On the back, there is a transit cancel of Colombo with a Ceylon stamp. None of these stamps really served any postal uh, services. So this is purely a souvenir cover. And I've identified the routing and the dates because it was a well publicized souvenir flight. According to one report, perhaps maybe 50 or less covers are known with Juan Grano's autograph. Now we go to again a more promotional and publicity flights. Royal Air Force was both doing so promotional flights from India to the Far East. This particular flight cover was from Karachi to Bangkok in 1930. Flight Lieutenant Anderson flew the airplane Westland Wapati that we see on the right side. Um, Indian stamp was applied and cancelled in Karachi, and it flew through from Karachi to Calcutta to Rangoon and Bangkok. On receiving in Bangkok, it received both two different Thai stamps, but more special this cover bears is receiving cancel of the Riyadh Thai Palace. It was a luxury hotel connected to the Thai royal family, and they had decided to do a special mail service cancellation, and then it was returned to Calcutta with from Bangkok. According to one report, only four covers are known with this particular cancel of the Thai Palace. So it was a special flight, special place in my collection. Does have a Stephen Smith's autograph on the back as well. Uh, this is another flight, same flight, but this is from Calcutta to Bangkok. The Mr. Smith had a fellow collector and a friend called Ravi Vora, and he prepared a special cachet for this Calcutta Bangkok flight, and it's addressed to him or care of him. And again, the Indian stamps and Thai stamps were more for souvenir purposes, as it served no postal service, as best as I can tell. There are more of these known, roughly 64 covers. Moving on, this is an interesting flight from England, led by Australian flight uh, pilots Fairbairn and Shenstone. I'm showing the aircraft that they used. This particular cover is from Calcutta to Darwin Lake, and this one does have a very well recorded itinerary that I've identified here. It was detained in Darwin for engine overhaul, and so the flight was delayed on return. It does bear the Australian two-penny stamp, which presumably paid for surface mail for return back to Calcutta to Stephen Smith. As a nice flight cachet, and it's supposedly around 43 covers are flown, maybe fewer signed by Stephen Smith, but I cannot verify that. This is an interesting to show how souvenir flights are getting so popular. So a French or Paris-based newspaper launched a competitive service, a competitive flight from Paris to Saigon. They're called French Aero Club race. Their round trip would have involved about a little over 14,000 miles. The price they offered to those who competed in equivalent today's dollar, it was equal to $1.64 million, pretty princely sum. So the this flight cover we see is by Maurice Arnaud. He had a co-pilot and an radio operator that flew French Caudron Golan aircraft we see on the right. We did have a likely route. And according to one report, as he was heading to Karachi from Basra, he was the lead. He was winning the race. However, tragically, at Karachi, he had a crash landing, jamming his retractable undercarriage that destroyed the plane. The covers were salvaged. So voyage was interrupted. He never made it all the way to Saigon, and they made the best of this unfortunate circumstances by creating special hand stamps. Both the pilot and the co-pilot signed it, and it was returned back to Paris as the receiving mark shows. One report believes that there were perhaps 50 covers that survived or preserved. Again, we are continuing with this popular phenomena of around the world or long distance flight, the promotional flights. Bertram Allen Atlantis expedition flight was very well known between 1932 and 1933. Their flight itinerary was from Berlin to Sydney, Australia, quite in a long distance. I'm showing you the plane. By then, the planes were, this is a seaplane, one of the first seaplane, I believe, that was used on this historic flight. This flight is very well documented because it was obviously, publicized for promotional reasons. And so we have a pretty detailed uh, flight log on which cities and when it flew and left all the way through. There were about 40 covers, and for the record, this is not in my collection. This was offered in one of Heinrich Keller's auctions. But there is a reason to show this because the next cover, which I have in my collection, is the return flight. But before we get to that, what happened is that toward the leg approaching Australia, the flight flew from Timor and it was supposed to fly short distance, few hours, to Cape St. Lambert, which is in a northwest part of Australia. Relatively short flight, but poor weather and bad condition ended up having a crash landing with a severely damaged plane. So now we're going to see the cover that was prepared for its return flight. So what I want to share here is really that it crash landed in 15th of May in a remote part of this Cape St. Lambert area. There were no civilized population, and reports were that the crew actually survived living on snakes and lizards at that area for a few weeks, a couple of weeks before the local Aborigines found them. It took a few months to organize and return of the plane back to Darwin, late June. It took about 6 months to get the plane repaired and make it flight worthy. So by December 32, the flight was ready. They tried to make the best of it. I have not seen any mail that could have been sent from original inbound flight, but the ones that we have seen and that I have in my exhibit was specially prepared. Maybe a way to salvage some financial compensation. And it was also underwritten by Castrol, which is a British company that specializes in lubricants, including aviation lubricants. So you can see there on the corner, left corner, Castrol trademark. It's pretty elaborate cover that was designed to fly from from Darwin, I'm sorry, to Berlin. That flight was not well recorded other than up to Karachi. So it flew from Darwin to Surabaya. There it had a 4 month of delay, either because of the weather condition and or the bureaucratic process for them to get approval to fly and land at various transit ports. So it finally did leave and land in Akiab. That's where we see the Indian stamp applied. From there on to Karachi, where it landed on 6th of April. Then there is no record about the route or the dates it flew through, but this is some of the postulation, and it's believed it ended up in Vienna on 15th and reached Berlin on 17th. The other thing I would just mention is that on the right, lower right corner, you see the image of a crash, the crash and highly damaged plane. So it makes a fascinating story. Uh, One report says there were less than 15 covers reported. Sounds pretty low, but could be more. Now we're going to change the type of covers that result in combinations. So the three categories that we'll cover here. One is an underpaid mail, uh, because the postal rates, both to the final destination from India or within the country of destination, were not well known or not established. And so there was a logical that these would be require or use second country's franking. However, later, after 1930s, airmail flights and rates were well established to and from US in the club by class of service and weight. And then lesser understood are the special services that US Post Office provided, such as custom clearances for which they require 10-cent postage. So this is a 1927 KLM flight from Calcutta to Batavia. It was the first flight route from Amsterdam via Calcutta to Batavia. It's a fairly well-known flight cover. Bears two honor stamps. Unclear whether that was intentional or not, but that was not adequate postage. It was underpaid for UPU rate, surface mail rate to Batavia, and but the Dutch flight label does show it was a special carriage from Calcutta. That was probably ignored. It arrived in Batavia on 1st of July. The Batavia Post Office determined, because it was underpaid, as per the UPU regulation, they calculated the shortfall in centimes and then doubled it. And so they converted it back to the Dutch East Indies currency that turned out to be equivalent to 15-cent posted due. So even though it's clearly a philatelic cover, it's an interesting in my mind because it was properly treated for underpayment by using posted due as required under UPU, as opposed to just souvenir stamps. Now we go to some underpaid mail from India to US. On the left is a private postcard sent by Airmail. Those of you who are familiar with some of the well-known figures in Gujarat, this postcard was sent from Ahmedabad by a very famous Bharati Sarabhai of Sarabhai family dynasty. She was a well-known writer, internationalist, and she sent this private postcard to a publisher in New York. However, she did not, she only put 1 rupee stamp versus the 1 rupee 2 ana rate. It had specified the flight would go through Lagos, the misspelling, and so Indian Post Office clearly recognized the underpayment and used the French equivalent cachet of C20. And on receipt in New York, the New York Post Office did collect the postage by applying 2-cent postage due. It was duly censored because it was during World War II. The second one is a postal stationery card from King George V, still valid in 1950, sent from Pondicherry. The sender either was unfamiliar or chose not to and did not put the correct 9 ana rate. He should have put another 5 ana, which he didn't. So, not surprisingly, New York Post Office Well, first of all, the post office in India applied the circular T with 60 centime to indicate to the New York post office the postage due required. And then in New York, the New York post office did the hand stamp with the applying 10-cent postage due to collect it from the recipient. This one is an interesting cover because it was a cover that was underpaid by 1 rupee 3 anna in 1941. What made this probably unusual is because, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, what made it unusual is that the sender originally intended to send this cover through Africa via Durban. For some reason, and I'm not sure why, the cover ended up going through Pacific route. Now, the Pacific route was longer and far more expensive than the one through Africa. And so the cover was censored, was sent from Calcutta to Singapore to Hong Kong by Imperial Airways, from Hong Kong to Hawaii and San Francisco by Pan Am. Some of the covers on those flights where Hawaii transit canceled. This one doesn't, or unless there's a box cancel that could be a marking at Hawaii. And on receipt in New York, equivalent nearest rounded up posted due was 75 cents, pretty high posted due. But it's an interesting example of how the sender may intentionally or unintentionally didn't understand the complexity of the postal rates depending on which routing it was sent. This one is another part of the destination. This is a cover from India to South Africa in 35 to Durban. Again, the airmail rate was 12 and a half annas. So it was not fully paid. It was underpaid by 1 anna. And so there was a proper UPU cancellation for posted due in the T. And when it was received in Durban, it received the posted due circular cancel T with 2 pence. And the postage underpayment was collected using South African 1932 2 pence posted due stamp. In my experience, mail from India to South Africa, airmail for sure, with South African postage due are fairly uncommon. And this is a good example of a commercial cover, not philatelic, as the other three ones we showed. This is actually one of my favorite covers. It's a 1941 airmail parcel from Bombay to Providence, Rhode Island. Apparently, it was sent by an exporter of pearls, natural pearls, and this cover actually carried some natural pearls from in Bombay to U.S. It was insured and registered. In the current valuation terms, those pearls would be valued at $1,670. The postage paid both for registration fee, for insurance, and the airmail rate added up to 59 rupees 4 anna 6 paisa, one of the highest airmail postage on a registered insured cover from India to US. And it seemed to have taken the route via Hong Kong because it does have a Hong Kong censor postmark as well as a registered Hawaii transit cancel. One of the puzzling aspects, it does bear a London transit cancel, which might remain that it may have been rerouted. When it arrived in Providence, Rhode Island, the U.S. Post Office there charged 10-cent postage due to collect for customs fee. As my personal bias, this is one of my favorite covers because it's purely commercial. Now we are going to discuss what I would call underpayment of postage for airmail services within the United States. This was something was not well understood. typical postage from India to US on airmail only covered the postage for surface mail once it entered a US port. If the sender wanted the mail to go by airmail within the United States, it required additional postage. And but this was largely unknown from 1924 to 1930 to most senders from India. Um, it only the full proper rates were not really established between India and United States till November 1, 1946, according to U.S. Post Office records. This is an interesting cover. It's a part. It was sent in 1935 from India by an American tourist who was visiting India on a tourist ship from Bombay. The tourist apparently was well versed, both in terms of the postage required to send from Bombay to U.S., but also knew that in order to get airmail service within U.S., he or she had to add a U.S. stamp. So the tourist obviously had both American stamps and got Indian stamps. So this cover was sent with enough stamps for 8.5 on an airmail rate to Paris. And that rate not only covered the airmail rate to Paris, France, but also surface mail from there on to US. But once it arrived in New York, the cover was addressed to San Francisco. Then, in order for the cover to fly from New York to San Francisco, it required the airmail postage of 6 cents that was due. New York Post Office mistakenly thought it was underpayment, so they applied a T cancellation, but that was crossed out when they understood that this is a correct postage. So very interesting in my mind, a very non-philatelic, proper use of Indian stamps with the American stamps. This is a philatelic cover, obviously. It was a first flight Pan Am, FM 18 from New York to Marseille and to Paris. The sender decided to send this cover, first flight cover, to his recipient in India, in Kerala, I believe. His address is now not seen because there was a pre-printed label for return flight. He did apply the 50-cent airmail, which was the proper airmail rate from US to India at that time. The plane did fly by Pan Am from Paris to London. I'm sorry, from New York to Marseille, and then Paris to London by Air France, from London to Bombay by Imperial Airways. Cover was received on 29th of May. There was a cancellation error of 9th. And then the sender returned by adding additional correct postage of 9.5 annas. Philatelic, but very properly handled for return flight. Now we're going to go to the creation results of the airmail service during World War II. And field post offices, both in India and other parts of the war zones, did carry British and Indian stamps. They had access to it. Incremental airmail service rate can be paid either by British or Indian stamps, as we'll see. And a more fascinating cover we're going to see next is one from China to the Middle East through India. Oh, I'm sorry. This is, we're going to go from Persia to London, England. I'm sorry. This cover was sent from a field post office in Persia in 1942. It does bear 3 anna Indian stamp, which would pay for surface mail. The sender wanted to send it by airmail, so he applied the British 6 pence and 1 shilling. That was with the airmail rate from there to England. Cover was censored both in Persia and in Cairo. And so this is a very proper non-philatelic combination franking through the military mail. This is a fascinating cover. What I would like to call this a spectacular over-the-hump flight cover. During the 1940 142, U.S. had a major presence with its Air Force both in Northeast India, and the reason is because the U.S. Air Force with the Chinese nationalist government decided that they needed to ferry both the equipment, military equipment, supplies, mail between to China, and the only safe way, because of the war, would be taking it to India and then flying over Himalayas and onto China or vice versa. Among the U.S. Air Force personnel, this was popularly called over the hump. So I thought it may be interesting for people to know why it's called over the hump, because it was flying over the Himalayan mountains. So this cover was sent from U.S. Air Force Base in Kunming, China, to a fellow officer in Egypt via India. I'm not. I think the thought may be that this officer applied $3.75 equivalent of Chinese postage, thinking that would be the postage required by Chinese post office. However, this cover was never entered, to my knowledge, the Chinese postal service. It was simply handed over to the U.S. Air Force Base in Kunming. They flew it on their Air Force flight to Dinjan, I think, which is now in Assam. Then Indian Air Force had a connecting flight service from Dinjan, India, to Calcutta, so it was flown there. Once it arrived in Calcutta, Indian military personnel applied, or U.S. personnel applied 8 Anna Indian stamp, which would cover the airmail rate for the air zone, for the military personnel. And so it was flown from Calcutta to Karachi, where we see some transit cancellations and sensor markings. And from there, it was flown to Egypt, where there's the British Army cancellation, and it was censored. So, in other words, both by Indian and British field post offices. It was actually cover slit open. As you can see, it was resealed with a label. Again, this is one of my favorite covers because it's one of the lesser known mail service from China to Middle East to India by U.S. Air Force and Indian Air Force. Another interesting tidbit toward the end of the war in 1946, when the British took over Hong Kong, there was a temporary field post office established with Indian personnel, and that was field post office 222. This particular cover is interesting. It was presumably sent by one of the British officers or British soldiers from Hong Kong to England. Hong Kong field post office, Indian post office, apparently had access to Hong Kong postal stationery, and because it was registered, it made sense for the personnel to use the Hong Kong postal stationery envelope, paying 25-cent registration fee, and the rest airmail fee, 1 rupee 1 anna, I believe, was, I'm sorry, 1 rupee 9 paisa, 1 rupee 2 anna, sorry, was the airmail rate from Indian field post office to England. And it was interesting because this field post office only operated for less than 9 months. So very few covers are known with using Indian stamps with on a Hong Kong stamps or postal stationery. So again, it's a pretty nice non-philatelic cover. Now we go to the end of our presentation, dealing with 3 non-UPU neighbors of India. Afghanistan, which became member of UPU in April 1928, although the airmail services was not well organized there even then. The second is Nepal, which actually surprisingly didn't join UPU till 56. And last but not the least, Bhutan, we joined in 1969. So we'll start with Afghanistan. So here's a 1933 cover from German legation in Kabul to Germany. It was sent using Afghan stamps of 25 pool and 50 pool or 75 pool. That probably was double the rate for posted to India, but it needs to be verified. And then the sender included 2 4 Airmail stamps to pay for the 8 Airmail rate from Karachi to Germany, which was the correct rate. The cover arrived by land from Afghanistan through Lahore and onward by train to Karachi. It arrived apparently late for the scheduled flight, and so there's a hand stamp that says "too late for airmail" on 4th of October, Karachi, and then it was sent subsequently to Germany by airmail. We think it was still sent by airmail. So a very modern cover from Nepal to India, where typically most of the mail by this time from Nepal, both going outward to India or outside beyond India, were handled by Indian Embassy in Kathmandu, and they obviously had a pretty large post office and had all the Indian stamps required. This particular sender, happened to be a medical missionary in a suburb of Kathmandu, about 2 miles, to a fellow missionary in America. And my hypothesis is that he added not only the Indian stamps, which he knew needed to be sent by airmail outside of Nepal through India, but also he chose to add up the Nepal stamps amounting to a total of 28 paisa. And my hypothesis is that may have covered local delivery from the Nepal post office or post office there to Indian Embassy in Kathmandu. And then the airmail postage did bear the Indian stamps, but it was an overpayment of 3 paisa for some reason. Okay, this is the last of the show. It's a pre-UPU Bhutan, India. It's purely philatelic cover. The bears the Bhutan stamps, which I'm not sure had any relevance to the actual postage between Bhutan to India, because you can see it's philatelic, because there's also a Sikkim revenue stamp added for making it more exotic. It was sent by overland from Ponchalong in Bhutan to Kalimpong. I expect the sender had applied Indian stamps that you can see on the left, the map and the Tiger series. And it was sent registered airmail. Perhaps the sender either didn't have the right postage, but he ended up doing an overpayment of 20 naya paisa, and then it has a proper receiving cancels in New York. Mr. Binder was a very well-known American collector of Bhutan and Tibet. In conclusion, the combinations covers result from a number of different reasons, which we have outlined and discussed at some length. And with that, I'd like to end my presentation or stories as you may like to see it, and happy to answer any questions or suggestions or ideas to improve it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ravi Vora, many thanks for a very, very interesting presentation.